Vengeful ghosts and curses. Throughout history, man has governed his life according to certain laws and principles. A consensus natural order evolved over the centuries. Those caught defying that order face the consequences of human justice. Sometimes, though, justice is not seen to be done. Criminals go unpunished. Murders remain unsolved. But do the undetected guilty parties really ever get away with it? Or do eerie, inexplicable forces intervene to restore the balance in matters of life and death? The Fiend in Bandages. Only 4 men escaped when the British square-rigged yacht Parrot capsized in the Atlantic in July 1884. Huddled in a battered dinghy, they drifted for 25 days. Near death from starvation and exposure, Captain Edwin Rutt then made a last desperate suggestion. Lots should be drawn to determine which of the 4 would be eaten. 2 of the sailors agreed with Rutt, but 18-year-old Dick Tomlin, the youngest crewman, protested that he'd rather die than eat human flesh. Tomlin's resistance sealed his fate. At the first opportunity, Rutt crept towards the sleeping boy and drove a knife deep into his neck. The mate Josh Dudley and seaman Will Hoon had no reservations about cannibalism. When they were rescued by the yacht Gellert 4 days later, it was the slain boy's flesh that sustained them. The horror-stricken master of the Gellert rejected the idea of burial at sea. Hidden away underneath a tarpaulin, the body of the victim accompanied the 3 survivors to the Cornish port of Falmouth. All 3 were tried and condemned to death for the murder on the high seas. But the Home Secretary decided there had been horror enough and commuted the sentence to 6 months imprisonment. No one could have known that the horrors were only beginning. When the 3 men were freed from jail, they found little future. To keep body and soul together, Josh Dudley found work as a drayman. 2 weeks later, his team of horses saw something that frightened him in the middle of the foggy London street. Bolton, they tossed Dudley to the cobblestones where his head shattered to pieces. Witnesses said the thing in the fog had been a figure swathed from head to foot in blood-stained bandages. After Dudley's death, the figure mysteriously vanished. With fear beginning to take root, Captain Rutt went to the Soho slums and sought out Will Hoon. He found the old seaman far gone in drink, a sodden derelict in desperately bad health. Rutt told Hoon that some vengeance-crazed relative was masquerading as Dick Tomlin's ghost, and he urged Hoon to help him ferret out the plotter. But Hoon only wanted more gin, and in a last delirium, he was taken to the charity ward of a hospital where he died in a screaming fit. Witnesses said later that another patient, dressed all in bandages, had been holding Hoon down, apparently trying to soothe him. Then the patient vanished. Now in a state of abject terror, Rutt went to the police. They scoffed at his tale of a figure in bandages, but in view of the captain's mental condition, they offered him a night of lodging in a cell. Rutt went gratefully to the cell, checking twice to be sure he was locked in. It was a cell block for the disturbed of London, and screams in the night were not uncommon. But when at 3 a.m. the police heard the captain, some distinctive quality in his cries brought warders running. They unlocked the door and went to his bunk, where Rutt lay with his knees scissored upward and his dead eyes like marbles. Clenched in his fingers, the shocked Bobby saw shreds of cotton and blood-stained gauze. The Gallows Curse. Norfolk Island, a dot in the Pacific Ocean, 900 miles off the east coast of Australia, was a British penal colony until the last century, and many residents today claim to have seen the specters of convicts hanging there. The strangest mystery is the legend of Barney Duffy's curse. The giant Irishman escaped from the colony's jail, was found hiding in a hollow tree by 2 soldiers. Duffy knew he'd be executed if he returned to the prison. He warned the privates, "If you take me back, you will die violently within a week of my hanging." The 2 men ignored the threat, and Duffy died on the gallows. 2 days later, the soldiers went fishing from a beach near the tree where they'd captured him. The next morning, their beaten bodies were washed up by the tide, and no one ever discovered who or what had killed them. Murder on the menu. Innkeeper Lazio Kronberg and his wife Susie faced a bleak future in the little Hungarian town of Tiszakört. It was 1919 and the couple had spent their savings trying to keep the inn going throughout the Great War. Now they had hardly enough to buy food. There were other tragedies. Their only daughter had run away to Budapest, where she was said to be a prostitute. Their eldest son Nicholas had also run away, fleeing the house at the age of 9 after Laszlo whipped him horribly for failing at school. The other 2 sons had died in the war. Night after night, the old couple would sit and discuss the hopeless years ahead. At last they came to the grim decision that there is only one hope: murder for profit. Carefully, they prepared for the killings. Laszlo dug a long trench 6 feet deep in the woods. He filled it with quicklime, prepared to tell anyone who had asked they was planning to build new outhouses. For the village store, Susie brought home a small brown sack filled with strychnine crystals. She told the storekeeper they're going to use it to poison wolves. Between 1919 and 1912, 10 people breathed their last in the Kronberg Inn. In all cases, there had been good wine with dinner and an even more remarkable vintage afterwards, heavily laced with strychnine. The couple grew more cautious as their stolen wealth increased. There must be only one more victim, and then the quicklime pit would be sealed forever. It came on August 14th, 1922. A genial fat man in his mid-30s, with a suitcase so heavy that must surely contain gold coins. He'd been a salesman for years, and was now looking for good land in which he could invest his money. When Susie cooked the evening meal and Laszlo served it, the visitor insisted they must be his guests for supper. They must call him by his nickname, Lucky. Throughout the festive 2-hour meal, the guests talked about his travels, and was so friendly that the Kronbergs were reluctant to kill him. But it had to be done. And at last, Susie brought in the special wine. Their fat guest died as he drained his glass, convulsing, his lips curled back from his teeth in the final spasm of strychnine poisoning. In Lucky's bedroom, they searched his bag and saw at once they'd been right. There was an absolute fortune in gold coins. His hands shaking, Laszlo pawed through the dead man's clothes, and then saw something else. A snapshot of the Kronbergs themselves. The couple looked at each other with dawning horror and grief. They had murdered their long-lost son. They left the gold and went back to the dining room where Nicholas was slouched at the table. They wrote a short confession and sat down with him. 3 days later, the villagers found them, all dead from strychnine poisoning. During the years that followed, few ventured inside the house. Those daring to stay 2 or 3 nights with a view to buying the place were always frightened off by the same grisly apparitions. The sight of 13 ghostly figures from the 1920s, seated around the dining table. Each had its lips peeled back in a ghastly, strychnine grin smile. Another war came and went. The house became dilapidated, but still no one would spend a night inside or even near it. Then on September 23rd, 1980, flames licking at the evening sky told the village an arsonist had been at work. The old inn was reduced to ashes. No one tried to find the culprit. No one cared. Tisserkurt was at last free of its house of horror. Thanks for sitting around and humoring an old fox and his tales. If you'd like more, please hit like and subscribe. And remember, nothing is more frightening than a fear you cannot name.